Social effects of the Industrial Revolution. This is something that we could devote an entire semester to, so we're just going to hit this very briefly. But you do need to know, in Western Europe and the United States, the rapid changes that industrialization had on the economy affected everyday life greatly. And we still feel these effects today. How we live in the United States today is a direct result of the Industrial Revolution. Work was carried on outside the home, which was a situation that separated family members. Factory workers were required to follow schedules and arrive at work at specified times, which in comparison to farm life that we were used to, this was completely different. Factories required workers to adhere to strict rules. Work was done to the noise of machines. The pace of work was generally more rapid than at home. It demanded a great deal of labor, so families moved from farms to cities to work in textile and other kinds of factories. Another factor in the move from farms to cities was the loss of farm jobs due to the increased use of labor-saving devices in agricultural. Social status began to be determined more by wealth than by family position in society. There was always a wage gap. I'll say this. As steady wages increased over time, a new social class arose in the industrial West, which was the middle class. This economic and social group between the rich and the poor had always existed, but in this era it exploded in size and political power. Women lost their manufacturing jobs carried out under the domestic system. They were expected to return to the traditional roles of homemaker and child care provider. They were expected to marry and stay home to take care of their husbands and children, and this created the traditional family structure in the West. Urban families had fewer children than their rural counterparts, and single women increasingly found employment as teachers and replaced men in these jobs. As the 20th century approached, women began to replace men in the business environment as secretaries and telephone operators. However, they're not allowed to vote in most Western societies until after World War I. Fewer children were needed for factory work later on in this period. And governments in the West, concerned about the prospects of millions of unsupervised children running around with nothing to do, passed laws requiring school attendance. So the reason that you are watching this video right now and doing these notes is a direct result of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution caused more cities to develop and rise to unprecedented sizes. And seeking a steady income, people left farm life, moved to cities to work in industrial jobs, and with the boom in urban population came overcrowded living conditions, high levels of pollution, higher crime rates, and a poor and increasingly discontent working class. And so pressures from these conditions led to proposals for sweeping changes in government policies in Europe and the United States. Please don't get me wrong, this took a lot of time. It took people unionizing, it took people protesting the government, protesting their jobs, and they had absolutely no protections. There was no such thing as workers' compensation. If you got your arm cut off from a machine, then you were just fired because you couldn't work anymore, and good luck to you. If you're, there was an awful situation with the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire where numerous women were killed because the doors weren't adequate for them to get out. And so the reason that we have exit signs and doors have to open to the outside, and we have capacities and fire marshals and things like that, that's a direct result of these people fighting for better lives for themselves and their families during the Industrial Revolution. Now, after 1850, the nature of industrial settings changed somewhat. Workers in Western societies received higher wages and shorter working hours, and this allowed them to have something that they never had before, and this was leisure time. With the increase in leisure time came popular interest in theater and in sports. Additional employment opportunities arose in secretarial work and sales. Some of these jobs were filled by women, especially those who were unmarried. The mass production of clothing made it affordable, allowing the general population to wear similar fashions, and the whole idea of fashion magazines and fashion ideals came about. And then popular consumption of manufactured goods led to advertising campaigns. There was an heavy influence in art and literature. Looking at the gritty life of the overcrowded industrial cities, artists abandoned the optimism of the Romantic school of art and shifted to realism, painting dark scenes of city life exemplified by locomotives belching black smoke. The camera was invented, and artists feared that would put them out of business, so they created Impressionism, and this was direct contrast to photography's graphic realism. They painted deliberately unfocused scenes of nature, and French artists led the way in this. Now, writers also responded to the effects of the Industrial Revolution, particularly Charles Dickens. He wrote stories about life among the struggling urban laboring classes in soot-covered London in the early 19th century. So, and examples of this would be A Christmas Carol and Oliver Twist, A Tale of Two Cities. There's a lot of them. Now, Japan. I would just kind of put a little star by this stuff because the AP World History exam focuses most often on the effects of industrialization on Japanese society. So we do need to discuss it, okay? Hold on, let me find my place. I'm so sorry. So, Western models of society were often imitated in Japan, especially in the educational system. Japanese students traveled, they were educated abroad, and brought back Western ideas. Other aspects of Western culture, like art and architecture, also influenced the Japanese during this period. And although tensions erupted in Japanese society over new Western influences, the government retained control of the industrialization process through the Ministry of Industry created in 1870. And they channeled other tensions into nationalistic pride. Japan was still a very patriarchal society. Women and children were expected to stay home. Shinto and Confucianism were still the primary religions, so that was not Western Christianity was not something that really took hold. Farmers who lost their lands because of their inability to pay the new agricultural taxes migrated to urban areas, and they provided a cheap source of labor. And they also migrated to other continents. Conditions in Japanese factories were as bad, if not worse, than many of those in Europe during the Industrial Revolution. Workers who attempted to escape their miserable plights were often shot. The conditions were really bad, and it became the topic of many songs and poems written by young women during this time. Latin America. The limited impact of the Industrial Revolution on Latin America meant that the continuities in social structures and gender roles remained throughout this area. But another major social development was that millions of Europeans were migrating to Latin America in the 19th century seeking new economic opportunities. And thousands of Japanese immigrants were pouring into the west coast of South America, mostly to work as laborers.